Hey guys, okay, this is going to be the third video for chapter 6, which is threats to external validity. And again, that corresponds with your learning objective number 5 from your chapter. And just as a reminder, these are the categories that are threats to external validity. But as a reminder, external validity, as we talked about before, is anything that limits the generalizability of the results. So anything that keeps you from being able to generalize the results that you found in your study to other situations, other people, etc. So there's 3 general categories here. One is generalizing across participants or subjects, which we have talked about a lot as far as being able to generalize from your sample to a population. Then the second category is generalizing across features of a study, like the procedures and the things that occur in the study or that the participants experience. And then category 3 is generalizing across features of the measures. So the assessments, the tools that you use, can you generalize the results to other tools and other assessments or measures. So let's go into a little bit more detail about each of those categories. So the first category is, again, threats to generalizing across participants or subjects. So the first one is selection bias. That's the idea that we talked a little bit about this when we talked about sampling, but I didn't mean to highlight that. But this is the example that if you're just selecting participants that are convenient all the time, again, sometimes that's all you can do, but you have to be leery or weary or any of those of that, because if you are selecting participants that are not representative of the larger population, then you cannot generalize the results from that sample to the larger population. Again, just depends on what you're trying to accomplish there. If you are looking to generalize the results to all young adults across the world, but you only sample a few students from a Midwestern university in the United States, you aren't going to be able to generalize that to all young adults, right? And so there's things that you have to be aware of for that. That's selection bias. Then there's overutilizing college students. Again, you've talked about this in your discussion post this week and the article that you read. There are many characteristics of college students that do not apply to the rest of the adult population. Things like intelligence or income or, there's lots of things. There's examples in your textbook as well. But there are things about college students that you cannot, like I said, do not apply to other adults, especially adults that have never attended college. And so you have to be careful of generalizing the results from a study that is only conducted with college students. Can you say that those results are going to apply to other adults? We don't know. And so you have to be careful of making those kind of generalized statements. Volunteer bias is the next one, and that is kind of the same idea as the college students, in that there are specific things about volunteers. And again, there's an extensive list of these characteristics in your chapter in your textbook, but there are things about volunteers that may just be different than the rest of the population. The simple fact that they decided to volunteer for your study says something about them, right? Is that a significant difference in their personality that is not going to be the same for people who would not volunteer for a study? And so would you be able to generalize your results that you found from those volunteers to people that wouldn't volunteer? An example would be volunteers may be more compliant, or they may be kinder or more generous. And especially if you're doing a study based on some of those characteristics, obviously that is definitely going to affect the external validity of your study and prevent you from generalizing to people who are non-volunteers, because they may not be compliant or kind or generous. Okay, and so then the next one is participant characteristics. Again, there could be things about the participants themselves that prevent you from generalizing to other people. These are things, demographic things like gender, age, race, again, socioeconomic status, all those things that could influence. If you are looking at preschoolers in, the northeastern United States, and that's all you're interested in generalizing to is preschoolers from the Northeast, then okay, then you're going to have external validity there, more than likely. But if you're trying to generalize to all preschoolers in the United States, you have to be careful there. That your external validity is not going to be as high, because you don't know that those preschoolers are going to respond and that the results that you got are going to be the same as if you had done it with preschoolers from other areas of the United States. And then obviously age, like you wouldn't be able to apply results that were only done on females to males, or only done on young kids. You wouldn't be able to apply those to adults, things like that. And then cross-species generalizations, that's just the idea that not all animal or non-human research can be applied to humans. Some can, but not all of it can. And so you have to be careful when making those kind of generalizations as well. And your book has more examples of that too. Okay, so category 2 is generalizing across features or procedures of a study. So the first one is novelty effects. And this is the idea that it's a novel situation, right? Participating in a study is a new thing for a lot of people. They've never done it before. It's exciting. It may induce a little bit of anxiety. They may be nervous. There could be lots of things that go into that. And so are they going to behave the same way that they would in the real world? Because remember, external validity is being able to apply it to things outside of the study, especially like real world applications. Would you be able to get the same results in a real world situation? Well, you have to be careful of that. You may not know, because if you don't take steps to see if they were, nervous or anxious or, things like that, that could play a role. It also depends on what you're studying, right? If you're studying things that are going to be affected by nervousness, excitement, anxiety, things like that, obviously you would need to be aware of that. If you're not, it may not have as much of an impact on the external validity. Again, it depends on what you're studying, but it is something to be aware of. Just the fact that they're in a new, different situation, they may be responding differently than they would in a real world situation. Also, there's the multiple treatment interference threat. So this includes practice and fatigue effects. Basically, this is the idea that if you are testing the participants more than one time, like maybe it's a pre-test, post-test, or it's just because of the research design, you're going to test them more than once, that could end up having an effect on the results, right? So fatigue would be like they are getting tired of answering the questions, right? Or they're just over it and they want to be done with this. There's also practice effects where they get used to the test. This is like very common in reaction time studies where they get used to it, and so the reaction time gets better, but it has nothing to do with whatever variables you are manipulating for reaction time. It's literally just because they're getting used to the whole process. And so those are things that can affect the validity of the study as well. And then last is the experimenter characteristics. Again, this goes along with the procedure part because it's what the participants are experiencing during the study. And so there could be things about the experimenter that create bias or that create that cause the participants to react differently or behave differently than they normally would. The book uses the example of a kind experimenter versus a harsh experimenter. And obviously that would affect the way that the person reacts. But things like that. I mean, it could be as simple as the experimenter being male instead of female, or the experimenter being older instead of younger, or blonde hair, brown hair. I mean, you just never know. And so these are things that you need to be aware of, that could have an effect depending on what you're studying. And it could cause you to not get the same results if you used a different experimenter. Now, if you used different experimenters, or if you used different treatments, or you put them in other new novel situations and you got the same results, then you would know that that your results can carry over. But again, that's why multiple research studies on the same things are so important. Okay, last category, category 3, is threats to generalizing across features of measures, or the tools or the assessments. Oh, there's a little ladybug in here with me. Okay, that's kind of lucky, isn't it? Okay, sorry. It just landed right next to my computer here. Okay, so the threats to generalizing across features of tools. So this is, can we use other tools to measure the same thing and get the same results? So one of the threats for this is sensitization. This is the idea that some studies, you're using an assessment to measure something, but in the real world, there's not assessments, right? So can you apply these results to real world situations where they're not actually being assessed? And so part of that goes into like a pretest. A pretest may make them more, what's the word I'm looking for? Aware of things, like maybe make them think about their behavior or their mood or their emotions or whatever the study is about in a way that they hadn't thought of before. And so now they're kind of primed almost to think about things more, and that could affect your results. Whereas if you hadn't pretested them, there we go, then that may not have happened. They may not have been aware of that, and so the results may have been different. And the same thing is true for any assessment. Really, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a pretest, but any assessment could make them more aware of things and change how they react, or change their answers, or change their behavior, just because now they're more aware of it. And so, and a great example of that is like diet programs where you write down what you're eating. And just the simple act of writing down what you're eating and making yourself more aware of it causes you to make healthier choices, and therefore you lose weight. So was it the diet program that caused you to lose more weight, or was it just the simple fact that you were writing down what you were eating and you were more aware of it? And so that kind of speaks to the validity of that as well. So if you used a different diet program or a different tool or assessment or a measure, would you get the same results? And then also we have generalizing across response measures. So the example that your book used was that there's many different ways you can measure fear, right? We've talked about that before. Heart rate, sweaty palms, anxiety scale, things like that. And so you say you choose heart rate as your scale, or as your assessment, your tool for measuring fear. And that's fine. You have to pick one of those ways for your study. So you use that, but your results that you get for your treatment, the effectiveness of your treatment for phobias or for fear, is that going to apply to other measures of fear? So if we're measuring fear in some of those other ways, would your treatment be effective for those ways of measuring fear as well? So that's kind of the idea of different ways to measure constructs. You want it to be effective across multiple measures if they're measuring the same construct. And then we also have time of measurement. So that is the idea of when you assess them, when you evaluate them, that can change the results, right? The example they used is the smoking cessation program, where you're trying to help them stop smoking. If you measure them very soon after they go through this smoking treatment stop smoking program, whatever, they end up quitting smoking, right? And so it looks like it's successful. But if you tested them again 2 months later, 6 months later, whatever, they may have started smoking again. And so the longevity of your treatment was not there. And so you cannot generalize your results over time. It's not, and so it's only a short-term generalization. And so time of measurement is also very important. So external validity, what are the 3 categories as your knowledge check? And again, here's the answer. 3 general categories: generalizing across participants or subjects, generalizing across features of a study or the procedures, the things the participants experience, and then generalizing across the measures. So using different measures. If you use different measures, will you get the same results? Category 2, if you use different procedures, will you get the same results? And then participants, if you use different participants, would you get the same results? So that is kind of a quick overview there. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do this learning check real quick. So a journal article reports that a new teaching strategy is very effective for first grade students. A teacher wonders if the same strategy would be effective for third grade students. What is the teacher questioning? Hopefully you realize that that's the external validity, because she wants to know if she can generalize the results from the first graders to the third graders. So that's external validity. And then the other question is, how can sensitization threaten external validity? And remember, sensitization is the idea of being sensitive to assessments. So once they have done an assessment, they're more sensitive to these things, what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and so that may change the results. And so this would be the idea of the pretest. So the results may be limited to individuals who experience the pretest. The people that didn't experience the pretest may not get the same results because they weren't being aware of their behaviors or thoughts or whatever it may be. So that is the threats to external validity, and we will do another video for the threats to internal validity next.